This supercar is only for people with actual money, Officer Mason Reed barked. Without warning, he aggressively snatched the car keys straight out of Maya's hand and threw them hard onto the ground. He closed the distance, cornering her, his voice dropping to a harsh, toxic whisper. Dirty money. You stole it. Don't try to explain. Maya held her purse close to her side. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she forced her voice to remain polite. We didn't steal anything, officer. We are confused by your accusations. You stopped our vehicle. So instead of trying to humiliate us, please tell us exactly what we did wrong. Mason gave a dry laugh. That's what they all say. Daniel stood beside the driver's door, hands visible, face calm. We were under the speed limit, he said. The registration is current. The insurance is valid. Mason tapped 2 fingers on the Ferrari's hood. You two have a perfect answer for everything, don't you? Maya blinked. Excuse me? I said you look like you practiced this. Mason leaned closer to the car window. Fancy vehicle, out-of-state plates. 2 black folks passing through my town with a story ready to go. It makes me wonder what you're trying to hide. There is nothing hidden inside, Maya said. She reached carefully toward her purse. I can show you the insurance card again, or I can call our attorney. Before she could finish, Mason stepped in and yanked the purse from her hand. She stumbled sideways and caught herself against the Ferrari's hood, her palm pressing into the hot metal. Pain crossed her face for one brief second before she forced herself upright. Daniel moved instantly. Do not put your hands on my wife. 2 other officers, who had arrived quietly in a second cruiser, stepped in front of him. One raised a hand against Daniel's chest, not striking him, but blocking him. Stay back, the officer warned. Daniel stopped. His jaw tightened, but he did not fight them. His eyes stayed on Maya. Are you hurt? Maya swallowed, breathing through the shock. I'm fine, but she was not fine. Her hand shook. Her pride hurt worse than her wrist. Mason snatched her purse and flipped it open, digging through it without permission. People who have nothing to hide don't protect their bags so tightly. I was trying to get our registration, Maya said, her voice shaking. You asked for proof. Mason didn't look up. I asked for compliance. I decide when you move. Daniel's voice dropped low. Officer Reed, this is unlawful. Mason turned toward him. You want to lecture me on law? No, Daniel said. I want you to remember it. Mason pulled Maya's phone out of her purse, glanced at the locked screen, and dropped it back inside. No phone calls. Not right now. Maya lifted her chin, her eyes flashing with anger. You have no right to take my property, or stop me from calling my lawyer. Mason smiled without warmth. I have every right when I suspect this Ferrari is carrying illegal goods. You know that's a lie, Maya said. The word landed hard. Mason's face changed. Careful, ma'am. You're already making this harder than it needs to be. Then he lifted his radio. Dispatch. Send Barlow County Recovery. High-value vehicle. Possible contraband transport. Possible VIN irregularity. Administrative hold. Maya stared at him. No. Please don't do that. Maya stepped toward him, her composure finally breaking. Officer, please. You know what that kind of note does. It will lock the car in the system. We won't be able to get it released. You have our documents. You can verify everything right now. Mason smirked, enjoying her panic. Now you're worried. Yes, I'm worried. Maya's voice shook with anger. Because you are writing a complete lie into an official police report. Mason's smile vanished, his eyes hardening. Are you calling me a liar? I'm telling you that your report is false, and it's going to ruin our lives, Maya said, standing her ground. She reached out, not to touch him, only to gesture toward the documents in his hand. Mason slapped her hand away. Maya lost her balance. Daniel caught her before she fell, one arm wrapping around her shoulders, steadying her against him. Maya. She gripped his sleeve, breathing fast. Mason smirked. Look at that. All this drama over a car you probably can't explain. Daniel looked up slowly. Choose your next words. Carefully. Mason stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound personal. People like you come through towns like this, thinking a nice suit and a rich man's toy make you untouchable. But around here, Money doesn't wash off suspicion. Maya's eyes filled with hurt, but she did not cry. People like us? Mason shrugged. You heard me, Maya whispered. Daniel, we should call someone. Not yet, Daniel said. Her eyes searched his face, desperate. Daniel, he is making up a fake reason to tow our car. I know. And he shoved me, she whispered, holding her scratched wrist. He actually put his hands on me. I know. Daniel's voice softened, but his eyes were like ice. And he is going to pay for every single bit of it. I promise you. Mason heard enough to laugh. Tomorrow morning, Brookhaven Police Department. Bring proof you actually own it. Bank records, purchase history, whatever story you want to tell. We already gave you legal proof, Maya said. Mason held up the registration. This gets reviewed. A flatbed tow truck arrived 20 minutes later. The driver wore mirrored sunglasses and greeted Mason by first name. Mason. The driver smirked, looking at the sports car. What's the catch today? Ferrari SF90, Mason replied. Lock it down. Nobody touches it without my personal say-so. The driver whistled, walking around the car. Looks like somebody's having a terrible day. Mason glanced coldly at Daniel and Maya. Somebody chose the wrong town to flex their money in. Daniel noticed the company name on the truck door, Barlow County Recovery and Storage. He noticed the driver taking photos before the vehicle was even loaded. He noticed Mason pocketing the key instead of tagging it properly. Every detail mattered now. Maya stood beside Daniel, one hand wrapped around her sore wrist. This isn't just a traffic stop. No, Daniel said quietly. It isn't. Mason handed Daniel a yellow impound slip. 9 o'clock tomorrow. Don't be late. Daniel took the paper without looking away from him. The tow truck pulled away. Mason got into his cruiser and drove off as if the matter were finished. But Daniel kept watching the road. Maya stood close to him, breathing slowly, forcing the tremble out of her hands. Tell me, you saw everything. Daniel folded the impound slip and placed it in his wallet. I saw enough, he said. And tomorrow, so will he. By the time Mason Reed returned to the Brookhaven Police Department, the sun had dropped low enough to paint the windows gold. He parked near the side entrance, killed the engine, and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. He should have felt satisfied. The Ferrari was gone. The couple had been sent away. The road belonged to him again. But something about Daniel Williams stayed in his head. Not the car, not the clothes, the calm. Daniel had not argued like a guilty man. He had not begged like a frightened one. He had watched. Mason hated being watched. Inside the station, the air smelled like old coffee, floor wax, and paper that had sat too long in metal cabinets. A deputy, named Carl Benton, looked up from the front desk. He was in his late 50s, gray at the temples, with the tired eyes of a man who had spent too many years saying yes to things he should have questioned. Evening, Mason, Carl said. Tow call go, all right? Mason tossed the Ferrari's keys onto his desk. Routine. Carl raised an eyebrow. Routine Ferrari? Out-of-state couple. Questionable ownership. Carl gave a low whistle. That'll get attention. Only if people make noise, Mason said. He logged into the department computer. The system was slow, the kind of county software that looked 20 years old and crashed whenever it rained. Mason typed the license plate number, then opened the impound report. Reason for stop. Suspicious vehicle behavior. He stared at the line. It looked weak. A lawyer could chew through that in 5 minutes. Worse, Maya Williams had spoken like someone who knew paperwork. She had said, official record, with too much precision. Mason clicked into the supplemental notes. Possible contraband transport. He paused, then added another line. Potential VIN and engine number irregularities pending verification. There. That changed everything. A simple traffic disagreement could be cleared by a phone call. A vehicle tied to contraband or a tampered identification number could sit for days, weeks, maybe longer. It required review. It required signatures. It required patience. And most people ran out of patience long before the county ran out of excuses. Carl glanced over. You sure about that VIN note? Mason did not look at him. I know what I saw. You checked the VIN? I said I know what I saw. Carl leaned back and said nothing. In Brookhaven, silence was often safer than honesty. Mason printed the report, signed it, then scanned it back into the system. He liked paper. Paper made lies feel official. His phone buzzed. "Barlow Recovery," Mason answered. "Yeah." A man's voice came through, low and familiar. "That Ferrari's in Bay 3. Clean car. Real clean." It was Earl Barlow, owner of Barlow County Recovery and Storage. Earl was 61, broad-faced, and always sounded like he had just finished eating barbecue. He was the kind of man who called everybody friend while counting their money. "Keep it inside," Mason said. "Already done. Took pictures too." Mason frowned. "For the file?" Earl chuckled. "For whoever needs to see it. Don't get ahead of yourself." "Mason, a car like this doesn't sit. You know, a guy in Jackson already asked if we ever get exotics through the yard. I could make a quiet call. It's not cleared yet. That never stopped us before." Mason looked toward Carl, who had suddenly become interested in his coffee. Mason lowered his voice. "Not tonight. Let it breathe." Earl went quiet for a moment. "You nervous?" "I'm careful. That woman give you trouble?" Mason remembered Maya's trembling hand, Daniel catching her before she fell, the way both of them had looked at him as if they were storing every second. "She talked too much. Educated type?" "Something like that." Earl laughed. "Those are the worst." Mason ended the call. At his desk, he opened the body camera upload folder. His camera had been off for most of the stop. Accidentally, if anyone asked. But the cruiser camera had caught distance video. No clear audio from where they stood near the Ferrari. That helped. Then Mason thought of something. The Ferrari. A car like that might have cameras everywhere. Dash camera, cabin camera, security mode. Rich people loved machines that recorded the world for them. His stomach tightened. He searched the vehicle model online. Ferrari SF90 onboard recording, dashcam storage, valet mode. The results made his mouth go dry. Some systems stored footage locally. Some connected to phones. Some uploaded through hidden modules. Mason stood too quickly, knocking his chair backward. Carl looked up. "You all right?" "Forgot something at the yard." At this hour, Mason grabbed the Ferrari keys. Evidence check. Carl watched him leave, saying nothing. Outside, the evening had turned purple. Brookhaven's main street was quiet, except for a few pickup trucks near the diner and older couples walking out of the Methodist church after a community supper. The town looked gentle in that hour, almost innocent. Porch lights came on. Flags moved softly in the warm air. Somewhere, someone was grilling ribs, but Mason knew the other Brookhaven, the one behind the polite smiles. The one with favors traded in back rooms and cars, moved through paperwork until ownership became a memory. He drove to Barlow County Recovery, a fenced lot behind an old feed store on the edge of town. The gate buzzed open before he touched the keypad. Earl met him near the office, wiping his hands with a towel. "You miss her already? Where's the Ferrari?" "Bay 3. Anybody touch it. Photos only." My nephew looked up the wholesale number. "Don't worry, nothing official." Mason turned on him. "I said don't get ahead of yourself." Earl lifted both hands. "Easy." Bay 3 smelled like oil, rubber, and hot metal. The Ferrari sat under fluorescent lights, beautiful and silent, too bright for the dirty concrete around it. Mason opened the driver's door and leaned inside. The leather smelled expensive. That irritated him. He searched near the mirror, under the dash, along the windshield. There it was, a small camera tucked cleanly behind the rearview mirror, almost invisible, unless a man knew to look. "Damn it," he whispered. Earl stood at the door. "Problem?" "Maybe." Mason found the memory slot and removed a tiny card with his fingernail. He held it between two fingers like a splinter pulled from skin. Earl smiled. "That all?" "Not all." Mason checked the console, the glove box, the screen menu. He found recording settings he did not understand. Cloud sync, event storage, external backup. His pulse thudded. He had the card, but he no longer knew if he had the truth. Earl's smile faded. "Mason?" Mason closed the door and pocketed the card. "Nobody comes near this car tonight. Nobody talks about it. Nobody calls Jackson. Earl studied him. Who are those people? Mason forced a laugh. Nobody important. But as he drove away, the lie sat beside him like a passenger. Across town, Daniel and Maya sat in a small roadside motel room with the curtains drawn. Maya had wrapped her wrist in a towel filled with ice from the machine near the lobby. Daniel stood by the window, speaking quietly into his phone. "Yes," he said. "Barlow County Recovery. Brookhaven PD. Officer Mason Reed. He entered contraband transport and VIN irregularity after the stop." Maya looked up. "Tell Hayes about the camera." Daniel nodded. "And Robert, check for any attempted access to the vehicle recording system tonight." He listened. Then his eyes shifted slightly. Maya knew that look. "What?" she asked. Daniel ended the call and turned to her. "The car just went into event mode." "At the yard?" "Yes." Maya lowered the ice from her wrist. He went back. Daniel looked toward the dark road outside. Mason had thought he was burying the truth. Instead, he had just touched it with his own hands. If you feel for Daniel and Maya in this moment, please give this video a like and tell us in the comments where you are watching from today, because someone near you might be watching this same story right now. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what happens when the truth finally catches up with Mason Reed. The Ferrari was no longer evidence. In Earl Barlow's mind, it was already inventory. By 7:30 that evening, Barlow County Recovery and Storage had settled into its usual night rhythm. The front office light buzzed above a desk buried under invoices, auction catalogs, old coffee cups, and a plate of cold ribs wrapped in foil. Outside, behind the chain-link fence, rows of impounded cars sat under sodium lamps like tired animals, waiting for someone to remember them. Earl Barlow stood in Bay 3 with his nephew, Travis, staring at the Ferrari. Travis was 32, thin, restless, and always looking for the shortcut that older men pretended they had never taken. He held his phone sideways, snapping pictures from every angle. "Front end's clean," Travis said. "No dents. Interior looks untouched. This thing's worth more than my house and Mama's house together." Earl scratched his chin. "Worth more than half this county, if you find the right buyer." Mason said, "Hold it. Mason says a lot of things." Travis lowered the phone. "You think it clears?" Earl laughed softly. "Cars like this don't clear. They get delayed. Owner gets tired. Lawyer sends letters. County says review pending. Storage fees stack up. Then one day somebody signs something and the car becomes abandoned property. That easy? It's never easy," Earl said. "It just looks that way. After you've done it enough." Travis looked back at the Ferrari. Its red paint reflected the fluorescent lights in long white lines. There was something almost wrong about seeing it inside that dirty garage, surrounded by tow chains, oil stains, and dented sedans. "Who were they?" Travis asked. "Couple from Atlanta. Rich. Looked it. Then they'll fight." Earl leaned against a workbench. "Most rich people fight with phone calls. The county fights with time. Time usually wins." On the wall beside them hung a corkboard with printed photos of other vehicles. A black Corvette, a white Mercedes, a blue Porsche Cayenne, a silver Lexus. Some had dates written in marker. Some had initials. A few had auction numbers circled in red. Travis pointed to the Corvette. "That one's still pending?" "Pending is a beautiful word," Earl said. "Means nobody has to answer today." His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and smiled. "Who is it?" Travis asked. "Lenny Sharp." "The auction guy?" Earl nodded and answered. "Evening, Lenny." A smooth voice came through the speaker. "Heard you got something pretty." "People talk too much. People talk just enough." "What is it?" "Ferrari SF 90. Red. Clean title. Far as I can tell." "Police hold?" "For now." Lenny chuckled. "For now is my favorite category." Earl glanced toward the closed bay door, then lowered his voice. "No paperwork yet. Just pictures. Sent them. Not officially." "Earl, nothing we do is official until somebody gets caught." That made Travis laugh under his breath. Earl sent 3 photos. Front, side, interior. Lenny whistled. "That's a serious machine." "What's the story?" "Out-of-state couple. Officer Reed flagged possible contraband transport and VIN issue. Real? Real enough for the system. Lenny was quiet for a beat. You want a soft number? Quietly. 200 if it gets messy. 3 if paperwork gets clean enough. Travis's eyes widened. Earl held up a hand to silence him. That's low. It's dirty. It's a Ferrari. It's a federal headache if somebody important owns it. Earl looked at the car. Nobody important ends up in Brookhaven, with Mason Reed writing the report. Lenny laughed. That's a dangerous sentence. Earl did not like the sound of it. He ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket. Travis was still staring. 300,000? Maybe. For one tow? For patience, Earl said. And for knowing which doors open after dark. At that exact moment, in a motel 6 miles away, Daniel Williams sat at a small table beneath a flickering lamp, studying information on Maya's laptop. The motel was clean but old, the kind of place where the carpet held memories and the air conditioner rattled like loose coins. Maya sat on the edge of the bed, her wrist wrapped, her black notebook open beside her. Barlow County Recovery has been contracted with Brookhaven for 11 years, she said. Daniel looked at the screen. Ownership? Earl Barlow. But look at the property records. Daniel leaned in. Maya turned the laptop slightly. The land is owned by a holding company. That holding company received county development credits 3 years ago. Signed by? Councilman Peter Voss. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Same Voss listed on the complaint Hayes flagged last month? Yes. Daniel sat back. So the tow yard is tied to a councilman, and the auction broker has the same mailing address as a company that bought seized vehicles from the county. Daniel looked toward the window. Outside, a semi rolled past on the highway, its lights moving across the curtains like a slow warning. Maya studied him. You knew something was wrong at the roadside. I knew Mason wasn't improvising. Because of the way he called the tow? Because nobody makes a false record that smoothly the first time. Maya closed her notebook for a moment. When he shoved my hand away, I wanted to end it right there. I know. I hate that we let him think he had power. Daniel looked at her wrapped wrist, and something in his face softened. He did have power, Maya. That's the problem. The badge gave him just enough to hurt people who didn't know how to fight back. Maya was quiet. Then she opened the notebook again. So we fight for them too. Daniel nodded. That's why we wait. His phone vibrated. A secure alert appeared on the screen. Vehicle event recorded. Remote access confirmed. Secondary storage active. Daniel turned the phone so Maya could read it. She exhaled slowly. He touched the camera. He touched the camera, Daniel said, and probably removed the card. Probably. Maya's eyes sharpened. But the cloud backup caught him. Daniel nodded once. Every second, back at the yard, Earl turned off the lights in Bay 3 one by one. The Ferrari disappeared into shadow except for one red curve of paint still catching the office glow. Travis hesitated near the door. Uncle Earl? What? You ever wonder if one of these people comes back with more than a lawyer? Earl looked at the Ferrari again. For the first time that night, the car did not look like money. It looked like a warning. Go home, Earl said. Travis left. Earl stood alone in the garage, listening to the buildings settle around him. He had built a life on other people giving up. Missed deadlines, lost paperwork, storage fees, shame, folks who could not afford another day off work to chase a clerk who would not return a call. But this Ferrari felt different, not because it was expensive, because Mason had been nervous. Earl walked back to the office, opened a drawer, and pulled out an old ledger. It was not supposed to exist. Names, dates, vehicle numbers, payment splits, initials. He stared at the latest blank line. Then he wrote, Ferrari SF90, red, Williams, Atlanta. He paused before writing Mason's initials. Outside the fence, a car passed slowly on the road, then continued into the dark. Earl closed the ledger. The Ferrari sat silent in Bay 3, recording nothing now. Or so he thought. But truth had already left the building. Mason Reed did not sleep. He sat at his kitchen table long after midnight, the tiny memory card from the Ferrari lying beside a half-empty mug of black coffee. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. The refrigerator hummed. The wall clock ticked. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked once and then stopped, as if even the night had decided not to get involved. Mason picked up the card and turned it between his fingers. It was so small, smaller than a fingernail, smaller than a lie, he thought, and then hated himself for thinking it. He had already plugged it into his old laptop. The files were there. Clear video, clear audio. His voice, Maya's voice, Daniel's voice, the flashing lights, the tow truck, the moment he yanked Maya's purse, the moment Daniel caught her when Mason pushed her hand aside. Every second sat inside that little piece of plastic like a witness waiting to be sworn in. Mason had deleted the files. Then he had emptied the trash folder. Then, just to be sure, he had snapped the card in half and dropped the pieces into the bottom of a trash bag under coffee grounds and paper towels. Still, his hands would not stop sweating. Because the dashboard screen had mentioned backup, cloud sync, he did not know much about that kind of technology. He knew radios, reports, traffic stops, intimidation, the slow machinery of county paperwork. But cars like that, Ferrari, were built for people who had money, and people with money had ways of protecting what belonged to them. Mason stood and paced his kitchen. "Think," he muttered. "Think." He called Earl Barlow. Earl answered on the fourth ring, voice thick with sleep. "Mason, it's almost 1 in the morning. Did anybody else access that car?" "No." "You sure?" "I'm sure because I locked the bay myself." "What about internet?" "That car got internet." Earl was silent for a moment. "You woke me up to ask if a car has internet?" "I'm serious." "So am I. I tow cars, Mason. I don't raise them." Mason rubbed his forehead. "There may be backup footage." Earl's voice changed. "Footage of what?" "Don't ask stupid questions. That woman really got under your skin, didn't she?" Mason gripped the phone. "Listen to me. Nobody touches that Ferrari again until I say. Not Travis. Not Lenny. Nobody. Mason, you told me the couple was nobody important. They aren't. You don't sound like you believe that anymore." Mason ended the call. Across town, Daniel sat awake in the motel room while Maya slept lightly against the pillows, her wrist resting on a folded towel. The ice had melted into a plastic bucket near the bed. The little lamp beside him gave the room a yellow glow. His phone displayed the secure vehicle alert again. Remote access recorded. External storage removed. Secondary upload completed. Daniel read the words twice. He did not smile. There was nothing satisfying about being right when someone had been willing to humiliate your wife to hide a scheme. Maya stirred. "You're still awake?" "Yes." He deleted it? "Tried to." She opened her eyes fully. "But we have it? We have the road footage. We have the bay footage. We have a timestamp of him entering the vehicle, after hours." Maya sat up slowly. "That's tampering. That's consciousness of guilt." "And the false report?" "Hayes is pulling the entry log. If Mason added the contraband note after the stop, the system will show it." Maya looked toward the closed curtains. For a moment, the anger left her face and something heavier took its place. How many people didn't have a camera? Daniel knew what she meant. How many had stood on that same shoulder with valid papers and shaking hands? How many had been told to come back tomorrow, then next week, then after review? How many had watched a car, a truck, a work van, something bought with years of overtime, disappear behind a fence while officials called it procedure? Daniel placed the phone on the table. "That's what we find out." Maya reached for her black notebook. "Then we need names. You should rest. So should you." Neither of them moved. She opened the notebook and wrote 3 headings. Mason Reed, Barlow Recovery, Auction Channel. Daniel watched her write. Her hand was steadier now. At 6:30 the next morning, Brookhaven began to wake. At Betty's diner, older men gathered under framed photographs of local football teams and church fundraisers. Coffee poured into thick white mugs. Bacon hissed on the grill. A waitress named June called regulars Hun and knew who wanted biscuits without asking. Mason entered through the side door wearing his uniform, his face pale under the brim of his hat. June looked up. "Morning, Mason." "Usual?" "Just coffee." "That kind of morning?" He ignored the question and slid into a booth near the back. Carl Benton was already there, stirring sugar into his cup. "You look rough." "Didn't sleep." Carl studied him. "About that Ferrari?" Mason leaned forward. "Forget the Ferrari. That's hard to do. Half the town heard about it by now." "From who?" Carl shrugged. "Tow trucks talk. Gas stations talk. Old men with coffee talk." Mason cursed under his breath. Carl lowered his voice. "Mason, I'm going to ask once. Was the report clean?" "It was clean enough." "That's not what I asked." Mason stared at him. "You getting soft?" "I'm getting old," Carl said. "There's a difference. When you get old, you start wondering which things are worth carrying to the grave." Mason laughed bitterly. "Don't start preaching." "I'm not preaching. I'm warning. That couple didn't act like regular folks caught in trouble. They had money. Money makes people bold." "No," Carl said. "Certainty does." Mason's coffee arrived. He wrapped both hands around the mug, but did not drink. At the motel, Daniel and Maya were dressed by 8. Daniel wore a dark suit with no tie. Maya wore a navy blazer and simple pearl earrings. Her wrist still ached, but she had hidden the tenderness beneath professionalism. Before leaving, Daniel called Robert Hayes on speaker. Hayes's voice was crisp. "We confirmed the tow yard connection. Barlow's land ties back to Councilman Voss through a holding company. We also found prior complaints. Same pattern. High-value vehicles. Out-of-town owners. Delayed release." Maya asked. "Race of complainants?" A pause. "Disproportionately black," Hayes said. "Also Latino and a few elderly owners traveling alone." Maya's jaw tightened. "Keep the elderly victims out of active contact for now. We don't need to put pressure on anyone vulnerable." "Agreed," Hayes said. "We'll handle interviews carefully." Daniel buttoned his jacket. "What about the dash footage?" "Received. Clean audio. His after-hours access is logged by the car and by a partial yard camera. We're getting warrants ready, but I want you two inside the station first. Let him commit to the false record in person." Maya looked at Daniel. "He will," Hayes said. "Be careful. Don't escalate. Let him talk." Daniel's voice was quiet. That was always the plan. At 8:55, they pulled into the Brookhaven Police Department in a rented black sedan. The building was low, beige brick, with an American flag moving lazily in the warm morning air. A veterans' memorial stood near the front walk. Someone had placed fresh flowers at its base. Daniel paused at the sight. In towns like this, honor and corruption could stand on the same lawn and pretend not to know each other. Maya stepped beside him. "Ready?" Daniel looked at the front doors. Yesterday, Mason had thought he erased the truth. He had only touched the surface of it. Daniel opened the door for Maya. "Let's keep the appointment," he said. Daniel opened the glass door, and the stale air of the Brookhaven Police Department greeted them like an old argument. The lobby was small, with beige walls, a row of plastic chairs, and a bulletin board crowded with community notices. Church fish, fry, blood drive, missing dog, veterans breakfast at the VFW hall. A television in the corner played a morning talk show with the sound turned low. Behind the front desk, a gray-haired dispatcher looked up from a crossword puzzle. "Can I help you?" she asked. Daniel stepped forward. "Daniel and Maya Williams. We were told to come in at 9 about our vehicle." The dispatcher's eyes flicked to Maya's wrist, then to Daniel's face. "The Ferrari?" "Yes," Maya said. The woman hesitated, then picked up the phone. "Officer Reed, the Williams couple is here." She listened, nodded once, and hung up. "Have a seat." Daniel looked at the chairs. Maya did too. Neither sat. 10 minutes passed, then 20. A man in a work shirt came in to pay a parking fine. An older woman asked about a noise complaint. A retired veteran in a faded Marine Corps cap stood at the counter, telling the dispatcher that someone had stolen a package from his porch. Life moved through the lobby in ordinary little troubles, while Daniel and Maya waited beneath the weight of something much larger. Maya leaned close to Daniel. "He's making us wait on purpose." Daniel's eyes stayed on the hallway beyond the desk. "Yes. You think he's watching? I think he wants us to feel watched." At 9:40, Mason Reed finally appeared. He walked out slowly, coffee cup in hand, uniform pressed, expression smug. If he had not slept, he had painted over it with arrogance. "Well," he said, "you came back." Maya's voice was controlled. "You told us to." Mason looked at Daniel. "You bring your proof?" Daniel held up a folder. Registration, insurance, purchase documents, and financing history. Mason took the folder but did not open it. "That might not be enough." "You haven't reviewed it," Maya said. "I don't need to review everything to know when something smells wrong." The dispatcher lowered her eyes. Mason motioned toward a side room. "Interview room." Daniel looked at the open hallway. "Are we being detained?" Mason smiled. "You're here voluntarily, unless you decide to make it difficult." Maya answered before Daniel could. "We'll stand right here." A flicker of irritation crossed Mason's face. "Suit yourself." He opened the folder, flipped through the pages too quickly to read them, then shook his head. "Still doesn't explain why a car like that is moving through Brookhaven," Daniel said. "A road is not suspicious because we use it." Mason looked up. "You always talk like that?" "Like what?" "Like you're in charge." Maya stepped in. "Officer Reed, yesterday you entered a false note into the system." The lobby went quiet enough for the television voices to sound suddenly loud. Mason's smile thinned. "Careful. You marked our vehicle for possible contraband transport and VIN irregularities." Maya continued. "You did that after the stop, without evidence." Mason closed the folder. "That's police business. It becomes our business when you use it to hold our property. It's not your property until I'm satisfied." Daniel's voice was calm. "That is not how ownership works." Mason leaned in. "In this town, it works how the department says it works." The retired veteran in the Marine cap turned slightly, listening now. Mason noticed and raised his voice, performing again. "Your vehicle is under administrative hold pending review. Could be 30 days. Could be longer. Depends on what we find." Maya's hand tightened around her notebook. "You won't find anything. Then you shouldn't worry." Daniel studied Mason's face. The man was trying too hard. "A confident liar does not explain." Mason explained. "Who has access to the car?" Daniel asked. Mason blinked once. "Authorized personnel. At Barlow County Recovery?" "Yes." "Earl Barlow?" Mason's jaw shifted. "You know Earl? I know the name on the tow truck." Mason gave a short laugh. "You been doing homework?" Maya opened her notebook. "We also know your report was updated at 6:18 p.m. yesterday. The stop occurred before 5. Mason's face hardened. "How would you know that?" Daniel let the silence sit for 1 second too long. Maya said, "Timestamps matter." The dispatcher looked from Mason to Maya. The veteran at the counter stopped pretending not to listen. Mason lowered his voice. "You two think you're clever." "No," Daniel said. "We think records should tell the truth." For the first time, Mason's eyes showed something other than contempt. Not fear, exactly, but calculation. He stepped closer. "Let me make this simple. You can file complaints, make calls, hire lawyers. Around here, paperwork moves slow. Storage fees move fast. By the time you get that car back, you'll wish you had just kept driving in something less flashy." Maya looked at him for a long moment. "Is that what you told the others?" Mason froze. Daniel saw it. So did Maya. "The others?" Mason said. Maya kept her voice gentle. That made it sharper. "The Corvette, the Mercedes, the Lexus, the people whose vehicles stayed in review until they became too expensive to recover." Mason glanced at the dispatcher. "That's enough." "No," Daniel said. "It isn't." Mason pointed toward the door. "You can leave now." "We came for our car," Maya said. "And I said it's under review." Daniel took 1 step closer. Not threatening, only certain. "Then, we'll need a signed copy of the hold order, the legal basis for seizure, the chain of custody for the keys, the tow authorization, and the name of every person who accessed the vehicle overnight." Mason's face changed. There it was. Overnight. He knew. Mason forced a laugh. "You don't get to demand anything." Maya reached into her purse slowly. This time Mason watched her hand, but did not move. She placed a small black card holder on the counter. Daniel placed his beside it. Mason looked down. Maya opened hers first. The gold seal caught the fluorescent light. United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. Daniel opened his. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The lobby went completely still. The dispatcher's mouth parted. The veteran straightened. Somewhere in the back, a phone rang unanswered. Maya's voice was quiet. Senior Prosecutor, Maya Williams. Daniels followed, steady as stone. Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Daniel Williams. FBI, Atlanta Field Office. Mason stared at the badges. For a moment, he looked like a man trying to wake from a dream that had turned against him. Daniel picked up the impound folder and placed it neatly on the counter between them. "Yesterday," he said, "you thought you were seizing a Ferrari." Maya looked directly at Mason. "This morning," she said, "you are explaining a federal civil rights violation." Mason swallowed. Outside, through the front windows, 2 black SUVs turned into the parking lot. Daniel did not look away from Mason. "Now," he said, "let's talk about Bay 3. The 2 black SUVs rolled into the Brookhaven Police Department parking lot without sirens, without flashing lights, and without hurry. That made them more frightening. Mason Reed watched them through the front window, his face losing color in slow degrees. Men like him understood noise. Noise could be challenged. Noise could be explained away. But quiet federal vehicles arriving exactly on time meant someone had already done the explaining before he knew there was a question. The dispatcher stood up halfway from her chair. "Officer Reed?" Mason did not answer. Daniel Williams kept his badge open on the counter. Maya Williams closed hers with a soft click and slipped it back into her purse. Her wrist still ached, but her voice had become steady again, almost gentle, and that made Mason feel smaller than shouting ever could. "Mason," she said, "you have one opportunity to make this easier than it needs to be." He looked at her. "You set me up." Daniel's eyes did not move. "You pulled us over. You came through here on purpose." "We came through here because Brookhaven is part of an active federal inquiry," Daniel said. "What happened yesterday was your choice." Mason's mouth opened, then closed. The front door opened behind Daniel and Maya. Special Agent Robert Hayes stepped inside first. He was in his late 50s, tall, silver-haired, wearing a dark suit and the calm expression of a man who had spent his career entering rooms where people suddenly wished they had told the truth earlier. 2 other federal agents followed him, both carrying slim document cases. No tactical gear, no dramatic entrance. Just paper, badges, and certainty. Hayes looked once at Daniel, once at Maya, then at Mason. "Officer Reed," he said. "Robert Hayes, Federal Bureau of Investigation." Mason tried to recover his old posture. "This is a local matter." Hayes nodded, as if Mason had said something expected and disappointing. "It was local when you initiated a stop. It became federal when you entered false information into a government system, detained property under fraudulent grounds, and attempted to interfere with recorded evidence." The retired veteran in the Marine cap whispered, "Lord have mercy." The dispatcher sat back down slowly. Mason pointed at Daniel. "He's lying. Both of them are. They were acting suspicious yesterday." Maya looked at him. "Suspicious how?" Mason hesitated. "The car. Their behavior. The route." "The route?" Daniel asked. "A public highway?" Mason's face tightened. "You know what I mean." "No," Daniel said. "Say exactly what you mean." That sentence hung in the lobby like a church bell after the last ring. Mason looked around. The dispatcher, the veteran, Carl Benton standing now in the hall, 2 federal agents watching. He saw no ally strong enough to hide behind. Hayes placed a folder on the counter. "We have the vehicle's remote system logs. At 12:43 a.m., someone accessed the Ferrari in Bay 3 at Barlow County Recovery. The primary memory card was removed. Secondary storage had already uploaded the recording." Mason's throat moved. "I went to inspect evidence." "Without logging the visit?" Maya asked. "I had authority. Authority still leaves footprints," Daniel said. Hayes opened the folder. He did not spread the papers dramatically. He simply turned one page toward Mason. There was a still image from the Ferrari's interior camera. Mason leaning inside the car, one hand near the rearview mirror, his face clear, His name tag clear, the timestamp clear. For the first time since Daniel and Maya had met him, Mason said nothing. Carl Benton stepped out of the hallway. His coffee cup was still in his hand. He looked older than he had the night before. "Mason," Carl said quietly, "tell them where the key log is." Mason turned on him. "Shut up." Carl flinched, then straightened. "No." That single word seemed to surprise everyone, including Carl himself. Hayes looked at him. "Deputy Benton?" Carl swallowed. The keys weren't logged. He pocketed them at the scene. "I saw them on his desk last night." Mason's face twisted. "You don't know what you saw." "I know what I'm tired of seeing," Carl said. Maya watched him with care. Not pity. Respect. It takes a long time for some people to tell the truth, and sometimes the first sentence costs them more than anyone understands. Hayes turned to one of his agents. "Secure the key control records, tow authorization forms, and impound system access logs." The agent nodded and moved toward the back. Mason stepped in his path. "You need a warrant." Hayes removed another document from the folder. "We have one." The words were soft. Final. Mason stared at the paper. His eyes moved over the seal, the signature, the federal court stamp. For a man who had hidden behind paperwork for years, there was no defense more painful than proper paperwork. Daniel said, "Where is the Ferrari now?" Mason looked at him. "Bay 3, Daniel said. "Correct?" Mason's silence answered. Maya opened her notebook. "And who gave Earl Barlow permission to photograph it?" Mason blinked. "What?" "Photographs were taken before the vehicle was processed," Maya said. "That is not evidence handling. That is appraisal behavior." Hayes looked at Mason. "We also have communications between Barlow Recovery and an auction intermediary named Leonard Sharp." Mason's hand tightened at his side. Daniel saw it. "Lenny Sharp," Daniel said. "You know him." Mason tried to laugh. It came out dry. "Small town. Everybody knows everybody." "That is exactly the problem," Maya said. The dispatcher lowered her head. The veteran removed his cap and held it against his chest, as if he had wandered into a funeral for trust itself. Hayes stepped closer to Mason. "Officer Reed, you are not under arrest at this moment, but you are being instructed not to leave this building, not to contact Earl Barlow, Leonard Sharp, Councilman Voss, or anyone connected to the impound operation. Do you understand?" Mason looked at Daniel with raw hatred. "You think this makes you untouchable?" Daniel's answer was quiet. "No, I think it makes you accountable." Maya added, "There's a difference." For a moment, Mason seemed ready to say something else, something ugly, something he could never take back. But the room had changed. Yesterday, the road had belonged to him. This morning, every word had weight. Hayes turned to Daniel and Maya. "We're going to the yard." Daniel nodded. "Mason should come." Hayes looked at him. "Why?" Daniel kept his eyes on Mason. "Because I want him to see what truth looks like when it's still sitting in Bay 3. Mason swallowed again. Outside, the Mississippi sun had climbed higher, bright and pitiless. The appointment had begun as Mason's trap. Now he was the one being walked toward the door. The drive to Barlow County Recovery and Storage took less than 10 minutes. But Mason Reed looked like a man aging by the mile. He sat in the back seat of one of the federal SUVs. Not handcuffed, not yet, but with an agent beside him and Daniel Williams in the front passenger seat. Maya rode in the second SUV with Robert Hayes, reviewing notes as the convoy passed the Baptist church, the tire shop, the pawn store, and a small diner where older men paused over breakfast to watch the black vehicles roll by. Brookhaven was awake now. Lawns were being watered. Flags hung from porches. A woman in a church hat carried a casserole dish into the community hall. It looked like any ordinary southern morning, the kind people over 45 recognized by smell alone. Cut grass, hot asphalt, diner coffee, and something frying somewhere. But beneath that peaceful surface, Daniel knew, was the machinery Mason had counted on. Familiar faces, quiet favors. A town where the wrong person could lose something valuable and be told to wait until waiting became surrender. At the tow yard, the chain-link gate stood open. Earl Barlow came out of the office before the SUVs stopped. He wore jeans, a stained button-down shirt, and the stiff smile of a man trying to look surprised while already knowing trouble had arrived. "Mason," Earl called, then saw the federal plates, and stopped. Hayes stepped out first. "Earl Barlow?" Earl wiped his hands on his shirt. "Depends who's asking." "Federal Bureau of Investigation." The smile disappeared. Maya stepped beside Daniel, her notebook already in hand. "We need access to Bay 3. Vehicle intake records, camera footage, and any communication related to the Ferrari SF90 brought here yesterday." Earl looked at Mason. Mason did not look back. "Do you have a warrant?" Earl asked. Hayes handed him a folded document. "Yes." Earl took it, read the first page, then stopped pretending he understood enough law to fight it. "Bay 3's this way." As they crossed the lot, Daniel studied the rows of cars. A silver Lexus with dust on the windshield, a black Corvette under a tarp, a white Mercedes with one tire low. They were not wrecks. They were not abandoned junk. Many looked like lives interrupted. Maya noticed too. "How many of these are administrative holds?" Earl cleared his throat. "I'd have to check." "You will," she said. Bay 3 opened with a metallic groan. The Ferrari sat inside, red and immaculate under fluorescent light. Its beauty looked out of place among oil stains and toe chains. For 1 second, Maya's face softened, not because it was expensive, but because it was theirs, and it had been taken as if ownership were something Mason could vote on by himself. Daniel walked slowly around the car. He saw what he expected. Driver's door fingerprints, slight smudge near the mirror, camera housing disturbed. Hayes looked at one of his agents. "Photograph everything before anyone touches it." The agent nodded. Mason folded his arms. "You're making a show out of nothing." Maya turned to him. "Nothing doesn't usually remove memory cards at midnight." Earl's head snapped toward Mason. "Memory card?" Mason glared. "Don't start." Hayes looked at Earl. "You didn't know?" Earl opened his mouth, then closed it. His eyes moved toward the office. Daniel saw the glance. "The records are in there?" "Standard invoices," Earl said. "And the other records?" Earl's face tightened. "I don't know what you mean." Maya looked toward the corkboard on the wall. Photos of vehicles, dates, initials, auction markings. She stepped closer and studied them without touching. "This is not a police evidence board," she said. "This is a sales board." Earl gave a weak laugh. "You're reading too much into shop notes." Maya pointed with her pen. Corvette, Mercedes, Lexus, Porsche, all marked before release status is complete. Hayes turned to Mason. "That your process?" Mason said nothing. Daniel walked to the Ferrari's window and looked inside. "The primary card is missing." One of the agents checked the camera housing. "Confirmed." Hayes faced Mason. "Where is it?" Mason shrugged. "Maybe the owner removed it." "Mason." Maya's voice stayed calm. "We didn't have access to the vehicle after it was towed. Then maybe the tow operator did." Earl raised both hands. "Now hold on." Daniel looked at Mason. "You were recorded removing it." Mason's mouth tightened. Hayes removed a tablet from his case and tapped the screen. The video played without sound at first. Bay, 3 at night. The Ferrari door opening. Mason leaning inside. Then Hayes turned up the volume. The faint sound of Mason's own breath filled the garage. His whispered curse followed. "Damn it." No one moved. The video showed his hand reaching to the camera, removing the card, checking the console, then closing the door. Hayes stopped the video. Mason stared at the frozen image of himself. Maya said, "Justice becomes dangerous when paperwork learns how to lie. But it becomes desperate when the liar realizes paper is not the only witness." Earl looked at Mason. "You told me they were nobody." Daniel's eyes shifted to Earl. "That sentence says more than you think." Earl swallowed. Hayes motioned to the office. "Open it." Inside, the office smelled of old barbecue, dust, and burned coffee. File boxes lined one wall. Auction catalogs sat beside county forms. On the desk, Earl's computer was still open to an email draft with 3 Ferrari photos attached. The recipient line read, L. Sharp. Maya looked at Earl. You were sending the car out for valuation before any lawful review. Earl tried to speak, but his voice cracked. It was informal, Daniel said. Informal theft is still theft. An agent opened a drawer and found the ledger. Earl closed his eyes. Hayes put on gloves before touching it. He opened to the latest page. Ferrari SF 90. Red. Williams. Atlanta. M. R. Maya read the initials aloud. M. R. Mason looked away. The room got quiet. Not empty quiet, but full quiet. The kind that presses on the chest. Daniel thought about all the people who had stood in places like this, asking for keys, asking for answers, asking why rules changed depending on who held the clipboard. Maya flipped back through the ledger. There are dozens, more than dozens, Earl said softly. Everyone looked at him. He rubbed a hand across his face. Some cars got released, some didn't. Some owners gave up. Storage fees buried them. Hayes stepped closer. Who signed off? Earl hesitated. Daniel's voice was low. Earl, men like Mason survive because everyone around them waits too long to tell the truth. Earl looked at Mason, then at the ledger. Councilman Voss, he said, and Leonard Sharp handled auction buyers. Mason fed the holds. Sometimes others helped. Mason snapped. Shut your mouth, Earl. Earl looked tired now, older than he had seemed 20 minutes before. No. I think I'm done carrying your mess. Maya wrote every word. Outside, a church bell rang 10 o'clock across town. Daniel looked at the Ferrari, then back at Mason. Yesterday, you called it suspicion, he said. Today, it has a paper trail. Mason had no answer. Bay 3 stood open, and for the first time, the truth inside had nowhere left to hide. By noon, Barlow County Recovery no longer looked like a tow yard. It looked like a crime scene with office chairs. Federal agents moved through the property with cameras, gloves, and numbered evidence tags. One photographed the corkboard. Another copied hard drives from Earl Barlow's computer. A third boxed invoices stacked near the coffee machine. Earl sat in a folding chair outside the office, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the dirt as if the ground might open and hide him. Mason Reed stood near the fence with Agent Hayes beside him. He had not been arrested yet, and Daniel understood why. Hayes wanted him to stew. A cornered man sometimes confessed. A frightened man sometimes called the people he should not call. But a man left standing near the wreckage of his own scheme often made the mistake of believing he could still manage the damage. Maya stood before the corkboard, studying the vehicle photos one by one. Daniel came beside her. What do you see? She pointed to the black Corvette. That one. Older model. Clean body. Local? Maya checked the ledger. Owner listed as Harold Jennings. Tennessee plate. Hold reason. Suspected VIN discrepancy. Daniel looked at the date. 8 months ago. Not released, Maya said. He followed her finger to the next photo. A white Mercedes sedan. Laura McBride. Louisiana. Hold reason. Suspected insurance fraud. Released. No. Transferred. To who? Maya turned the ledger slightly. L. Sharp. Daniel's face hardened. Auction channel. They kept reading. A Lexus belonging to a retired nurse from Georgia. A Porsche registered to a small business owner from Alabama. A pickup truck used by a contractor from Texas. A Cadillac owned by a church deacon traveling to a funeral in Memphis. Different vehicles, different states, different stories, but the same pattern. Traffic stop, vague suspicion, administrative hold, storage fees, transfer, auction. None of it looked violent on paper. That was what made it so cold. Maya closed the ledger for a moment. They stole pieces of people's lives and called it procedure. Daniel nodded. Procedure is what injustice wears when it wants to look respectable. Across the yard, Hayes questioned Earl in a calm voice. How were targets selected? Earl rubbed his forehead. Mason flagged them. Sometimes another officer did. Expensive car, out-of-state plate. Driver who looked like they'd have a hard time fighting City Hall. Race? Earl did not answer at first. Hayes waited. Earl finally said, mostly black folks. Some Latino. Some older people traveling alone. People Mason thought would be easy to pressure. Mason snapped from the fence. "You're lying to save yourself." Earl looked at him without energy. "I'm telling the truth, to save what's left of me." Maya wrote the answer in her notebook. Then she glanced at Daniel. "We need victim contact, handled carefully." "We will," Daniel said. "No surprise knocks. No pressure. Letters first, then calls." Hayes heard and nodded. "Agreed. Some of these people may have given up years ago. We don't reopen wounds like a roadside ambush." That line stayed with Daniel. He walked toward the black Corvette under the tarp. An agent lifted the cover carefully. Dust rolled off in a gray sheet. The car was still beautiful beneath it, but neglected. Daniel leaned close to the windshield. An old parking pass hung from the mirror. Memphis Veterans Hospital. Maya joined him. "Harold Jennings," she said, checking the file. 68. Retired Army mechanic. Daniel did not speak for a moment. His own father had worked with his hands, not on sports cars, but on buses, lawnmowers. Old Chevy's neighbors could not afford to replace. Men like that measured dignity by what they could fix and what they could keep running. Daniel imagined, only briefly, what it meant for a man like Harold Jennings to lose a Corvette. Not just transportation, pride, memory, something saved for, polished on Sundays, maybe driven only when the weather was good. He pushed the thought away before it became a scene. The story did not need imagination. The ledger was cruel enough. Maya touched the edge of the tarp. "This is why he couldn't let us walk away with the Ferrari." "No," Daniel said, "because if we got it back too easily, we'd know the hold was fake. He needed the system to trap us before we could question it." An agent emerged from the office holding a stack of printed emails. Agent Hayes. Hayes took them, read the top page, then called Daniel and Maya over. "You need to see this." The email chain was between Earl Barlow and Leonard Sharp. Vehicle photos, estimated values, hold status, suggested timelines. Several messages referenced M, R, and Voss approval. Maya read one line aloud. "Let storage fees mature before outreach." Daniel's eyes sharpened. They waited until people owed more than they could pay. Hayes nodded, then offered low settlement or pushed abandonment. Maya flipped another page. "Here. Ferrari may be sensitive. Officer says owners talk educated." Daniel gave a humorless breath. Educated was the warning sign. "To men like this," Maya said, "confidence looks like disrespect when it comes from the wrong face." Behind them, Mason shifted. "You don't know anything about this town." Maya turned slowly. "We know enough." "No. You know paperwork and fancy words. You don't know what it's like keeping order here." Daniel stepped toward him. "Order is not the same as control." Mason's eyes burned. "You think people respect the law because of people like you?" "No," Daniel said. "People respect the law when the law respects them first." Mason laughed bitterly, but the sound cracked at the end. A black sedan pulled up near the gate. A man in a tan suit got out, holding his phone like a weapon. He was late 50s, silver hair, polished shoes, county politician smile. Earl looked up and went pale. Maya saw it. "Councilman Voss?" Hayes turned. "Peter Voss?" The man stopped walking. "I came to see what all this disruption is about." Hayes met him halfway. "Federal investigation." Voss looked past him to Mason, then Earl, then the Ferrari. His smile struggled to survive. "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding." Daniel stepped forward. "There has?" Voss relaxed slightly. Daniel continued. "You misunderstood how long this could stay hidden." Maya watched Voss's hand tighten around his phone. "Councilman, before you call anyone, you should know all communications related to Barlow recovery, Leonard Sharp, and impound authorizations are now subject to preservation." Voss blinked. "Are you threatening me?" "No," Maya said. "I'm protecting the evidence from you." The yard went silent again. For the first time, Daniel saw the full shape of the network standing in daylight. Mason by the fence, Earl in the chair, Voss in his polished shoes, the Ferrari in Bay 3, and rows of cars that had waited too long for owners who had been worn down by delay. The Ferrari was not first. That realization changed everything. Hayes looked at his agents. Secure the remaining vehicles. Freeze transfers. No release, sale, or auction without federal review. Maya opened her notebook to a fresh page. Daniel looked at the Corvette, the Mercedes, the Lexus, and finally the Ferrari. The red car had brought them here, but it was no longer the center of the story. The missing cars were speaking now, and Brookhaven was finally quiet enough to hear them. Councilman Peter Voss tried to smile, but the smile had lost its job. He stood in the tow yard in his polished shoes, looking from the Ferrari to the federal agents to Mason Reed, who had suddenly found the gravel very interesting. Earl Barlow sat nearby with his elbows on his knees, a man who had spent years selling other people's patience and now had none left for himself. "This is a misunderstanding," Voss said again. Maya Williams closed her notebook. "You said that already." "Because it's true." Daniel stepped closer, not aggressive, just present. "Then explain the emails." Voss looked at him. "What emails?" "The ones referencing your approval on vehicle transfers before release hearings," Daniel said. "The ones tied to Barlow Recovery, Leonard Sharp, and several administrative holds that never received proper review." Voss's face tightened. "I don't discuss county business in a tow yard." Maya glanced around at the vehicles behind him. "That is exactly where county business seems to have been conducted." Robert Hayes gave a quiet nod to one of the agents. "Secure Councilman Voss's phone." Voss took a step back. "You can't just take my phone." Hayes held up the warrant. "We can preserve evidence. I'm an elected official." Daniel's voice stayed calm. "That makes the record more important, not less." For a few seconds, Voss looked like he might refuse. Then, he saw the agents waiting, patient and professional, and handed over the phone with the stiffness of a man surrendering more than a device. Mason finally spoke. "Peter, don't say anything." Voss turned on him. "You don't advise me." That was the first crack. Earl looked up from the chair and gave a dry, bitter laugh. "Now everybody's innocent." Mason snapped. "Shut up, Earl." "No," Earl said. "I did that for 10 years. The yard went still. Maya watched Earl carefully. 10 years? Earl rubbed both hands down his face. "Maybe 11. Started small. Abandoned vehicles, storage fees, paperwork nobody checked. Then, Mason figured out out-of-state owners were easier. Voss made sure the contracts stayed friendly. Lenny moved the cars when the paper looked clean enough." Voss pointed at Earl. "He's lying to protect himself." Earl looked at him. "Peter, I got your initials in the ledger." Voss's mouth closed. Hayes turned to Daniel. "We need to move this back to the station and separate them." Daniel nodded. "Before they start building one story together." Maya looked toward Bay 3. The Ferrari sat under the light, untouched now, guarded by evidence tags instead of suspicion. Her purse strap had left a faint mark on her wrist, mostly hidden beneath her sleeve, but she could still feel the pull when Mason yanked it away. She did not want revenge. Revenge burned too quickly. She wanted a record so clear that no one could bury it. "Bring the ledger," she said. An agent lifted it into an evidence bag. Mason watched the book disappear and seemed to understand. At last, that paper could betray him too. Back at Brookhaven Police Department, the lobby had changed. The dispatcher no longer pretended this was routine. Carl Benton sat at a desk with a written statement in front of him, staring at the first blank line like it was a confession booth. The retired Marine had left, but before going, he had quietly told Hayes he would answer questions if needed. "I've seen enough today," he had said, "and I'm old enough to know silence has a cost." Daniel remembered that. Silence has a cost. Mason, Earl, and Voss were placed in separate rooms. Not locked cells. Not yet. Interview rooms with beige walls, metal chairs, and clocks that ticked too loudly. Maya and Daniel entered the main conference room with Hayes. On the table lay the evidence: the false impound report, the system access log, the Ferrari footage, the tow yard ledger, printed emails, vehicle photos, and copies of prior complaints. Hayes looked at the spread. "This is enough for the first wave." Maya sat down. "Mason first." Daniel stood by the window. Outside, the American flag moved in a slow morning breeze. Across from it stood the Veterans Memorial, clean and simple, carrying names of people who had served something larger than themselves. Inside the building, men had used authority to serve themselves. The contrast hurt more than he expected. Hayes noticed. "You all right?" Daniel turned back. "I'm thinking about how many times a flag can fly over the wrong behavior." Maya looked up. "That line belongs in a closing argument. Maybe someday." Hayes set a recorder on the table. "Let's begin." They brought Mason in without handcuffs. He sat down heavily, arms folded, face hard. But hardness was not strength. Daniel had seen the difference. Hayes read the time, date, and names into the recorder. "Officer Reed, you understand this is a voluntary interview at this stage?" Mason said nothing. Maya leaned forward. "You entered possible contraband transport after the roadside stop. What evidence supported that entry?" Mason stared at her. "Training and experience." "What specific observation?" "High-value vehicle. Nervous occupants. Out-of-state plates." Daniel said. "None of those are contraband." Mason looked at him. "You people always want magic words." Maya did not react to the phrase, though Daniel saw her hand still for half a second. "We want facts." Mason shifted. "The VIN needed review." "Did you inspect the VIN plate?" "Yes." Daniel opened the file. "The vehicle's external camera shows you never checked the windshield VIN at the scene." Mason's jaw tightened. Maya slid a still photo across the table. "It also shows you removing the camera memory card at Barlow Recovery after midnight." "I was preserving evidence." "You did not log it." "I intended to." "You broke the card?" Mason's eyes flashed. Daniel said quietly, "That was not in the footage." "Thank you." Mason froze. Hayes made a note. Maya let the silence work. Good silence was like good cross-examination. It invited the guilty to fill it. Mason looked away first. "You think you're better than me?" Maya's voice stayed low. "No. I think you forgot people are equal under the law." He laughed once. "That's a nice thing to say when the law is on your side." Daniel leaned in slightly. "The law was on your side yesterday. You used it to hurt." For the first time, Mason had no quick answer. Hayes placed the tow yard ledger on the table, still inside its clear evidence sleeve. "Earl Barlow has begun cooperating." Mason looked at the ledger, then at Hayes. "Earl's a liar." "Perhaps," Maya said. "But liars with records can still tell the truth." Hayes added, "Councilman Voss is also being questioned." That shook him more. Mason swallowed. "Voss won't talk." Daniel's expression did not change. "He already blamed you." It was not exactly true. Not yet. But it was close enough to test. Mason's eyes moved too fast. There it was. Fear. Maya opened her notebook. "Officer Reed, you can keep pretending this was about one Ferrari, or you can start explaining the cars that never came home." The clock ticked. Mason looked down at the table. In another room, Earl Barlow was talking. In another, Peter Voss was sweating. Outside, agents were freezing accounts, preserving records, and calling names from a ledger that had waited too long to be read. The room did not become louder. It became smaller, and Mason Reed, who once believed Brookhaven belonged to him, finally began to understand he had nowhere left to stand. Mason Reed stared at the table as if the wood grain might offer him a way out. No one spoke for several seconds. Daniel Williams understood the value of silence. It made honest people uncomfortable, but it made guilty people desperate. Across the room, Maya sat with her notebook open, her pen resting between her fingers. Robert Hayes stood near the recorder, calm as a judge before a verdict. Mason finally looked up. "I want a lawyer." Hayes nodded once. Interview paused. He stopped the recorder. Maya closed her notebook without disappointment. That was expected. Daniel looked at Mason. It was also wise. Mason's eyes flashed with old anger. "Don't talk to me like you're doing me a favor." "I'm not," Daniel said. "I'm telling you the first lawful thing you've done since yesterday." An agent escorted Mason out of the room. He walked stiffly, but his shoulders no longer carried the same weight. Authority had begun to drain out of him. What remained was only a man in uniform, cornered by his own decisions. Hayes waited until the door closed. "Earl is talking." Maya leaned back. "How much?" Enough to open every file he touched in the last decade. Daniel turned from the window. And Voss? Still pretending the ledger is a misunderstanding. But his phone tells a different story. Hayes placed a tablet on the conference table. Before we go further, you both should see the compiled footage. Maya did not move for a moment. Daniel saw the small hesitation. She had already lived yesterday once. Watching it again would not hurt her body, but it would ask her dignity to stand trial a second time. Daniel said quietly, "We don't have to watch all of it right now." Maya looked at him. "Yes, we do." Hayes pressed play. The footage began with the Ferrari's front camera. Route 51 stretched ahead, sunlit and empty. Daniel's voice could be heard inside the vehicle, low and ordinary, mentioning coffee. Maya replied that the next decent place was probably near Jackson. Then blue lights flashed behind them. The view shifted to cabin audio and side camera. Mason's voice came through. "This supercar is only for people with money." Maya's face on the screen turned toward the window, composed but wary. Then Mason said the rest. The suspicion, the accusations, the questions about what was hidden inside, the false implication that the car was being used to carry illegal goods. The moment Maya reached for her purse, Daniel stood very still. On the screen, Mason yanked the purse away. Maya stumbled against the hood. Daniel moved forward. 2 local officers blocked him. The sound was not dramatic. No music. No shouting crowd. Just the small, awful noises of power being misused in daylight. A gasp. A command. The scrape of a shoe on pavement. Mason's voice telling them how things worked in his town. Maya watched without blinking. Hayes stopped the video. "We have enough." Maya shook her head. "Continue." The footage showed Mason calling the tow. It captured the tow driver greeting him by first name. It captured the words, "possible contraband transport," spoken before any search had been legally justified. Then the scene jumped to Bay 3 after midnight. Mason entered the Ferrari, removed the card, checked the console, and whispered his curse. Hayes stopped the video again. No one spoke. Finally, Maya said, "Truth had a habit of recording itself." Daniel looked at her. "And people have a habit of ignoring it until it becomes impossible." Hayes saved the file and handed the tablet to an evidence technician. "Digital forensics will certify the chain. The upload logs are clean. Vehicle server, timestamps, access records. Everything matches." Maya opened her notebook again. "Then the question is not whether Mason lied. It's who benefited every time he did." Hayes nodded. "Earl gave us the structure. Mason initiated the stops. Barlow Recovery stored the vehicles and inflated fees. Lenny Sharp arranged undervalued auction transfers. Councilman Voss protected the contract and cleared administrative delays." Daniel added. "And every victim was chosen because they seemed unlikely to survive the process." A young agent entered with a stack of printed reports. "We found the pattern." Hayes took the pages. "Summarize. 47 vehicles over 9 years fit the criteria. High value, out of state, vague hold reason, delayed release. 29 transferred or auctioned. 12 owners filed complaints that were closed without action. 6 still pending." Maya's face tightened. "Demographics?" The agent glanced at the page. "Mostly black owners. Several Latino owners. 3 elderly white owners traveling alone." Hayes looked at Daniel. It was broader than race, but race was the main filter. Daniel's voice was low. "Predators always adjust to vulnerability." Maya wrote that down, then paused. "We contact them carefully. No sudden visits, no public exposure without consent." "Agreed," Hayes said. The conference room door opened again. Carl Benton stepped in, holding his written statement with both hands. "I finished," he said. Hayes gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Deputy." Carl sat slowly. "I should have said something years ago." Maya's voice softened. "Why didn't you?" Carl looked at his hands. "Same reason most folks don't. I had a mortgage, my wife's medical bills, a pension close enough to see, and Mason always made it sound like the people complaining were trying to get out of something." He swallowed. "After a while, you stop asking because the answer might make you responsible." Daniel sat across from him. "What changed?" Carl looked toward the lobby. "That woman yesterday." He nodded toward Maya but did not look directly at her, the way she kept trying to be respectful while he kept pushing. I've seen that look before. Folks trying to stay calm because they know one wrong word can cost them everything. I'm too old to keep pretending I don't recognize it. Maya was quiet for a moment. Thank you for saying that. Carl's eyes watered, but he held himself together. Don't thank me yet. I waited too long. Hayes took the statement. It still matters. Outside, news had begun to move through Brookhaven without a single press release. People saw federal SUVs. They saw agents carrying boxes from the tow yard. They saw Councilman Voss escorted into the station, not in handcuffs, but without his phone and without his smile. By afternoon, Betty's diner buzzed with whispers. At the VFW hall, men who once trusted every uniform began asking each other about old traffic stops. At the Methodist church office, a secretary remembered a widow who lost her late husband's Cadillac and cried for 3 weeks. The town was not exploding. It was waking up. Back in the conference room, Hayes received a call. He listened, then ended it. Lenny Sharp tried to move funds from his business account, he said. Transaction. Frozen. Maya looked at Daniel. He knows. Daniel nodded. Then he may run. Hayes was already dialing. Not far. Daniel stepped into the hallway. Mason sat on a bench near an office door, watched by an agent. He looked up as Daniel passed. You ruined my life, Mason said. Daniel stopped. No. You built a life on taking from people who couldn't afford to lose. We just found the receipts. Mason's face twisted. It was never supposed to be you. Daniel held his gaze. That's the first true thing you've said. Mason looked away. By evening, the Ferrari remained in Bay 3, tagged and photographed. No longer a prize. No longer bait. No longer a trophy for men who mistook access for ownership. It was evidence now. Real evidence. Protected by the very law Mason had tried to counterfeit. Maya stood beside Daniel outside the station as the sun lowered over Brookhaven. Her wrist still hurt. His anger still lived quietly behind his ribs, but something larger had taken shape. This is bigger than Mason, she said. Daniel looked toward the tow yard road. It always was. The false report had brought them to Brookhaven. The camera had kept the truth alive. Now the truth was moving, and everyone connected to the lie could hear its footsteps. By Monday morning, Brookhaven had stopped pretending nothing was wrong. Federal agents were still inside the police department. 2 county clerks had been sent home pending review. Barlow County Recovery was locked behind yellow evidence tape, and the Ferrari remained in Bay 3 under federal protection. It was strange how quickly a town could change when people realized the quiet things they had tolerated were finally being counted. Daniel Williams stood in the station conference room with a cup of black coffee gone cold in his hand. On the wall, agents had pinned a clean timeline. Roadside stops, impound holds, storage fees, auction transfers, payments, signatures. Maya studied the board with her arms folded. It looks simple now, she said. Daniel nodded. That's how schemes survive. They only look complicated when nobody wants to connect the lines. Robert Hayes entered, carrying a thin stack of bank records. Lenny Sharp is in custody outside Jackson. Tried to say he was going to visit his sister. Does he have a sister? Maya asked. Yes, Hayes said. In Ohio. Daniel allowed himself a small breath through the nose. Not quite a laugh. Convenient. Hayes placed the records on the table. He started talking once his accounts froze. He says Councilman Voss approved which vehicles could be moved, and Mason controlled which cars got flagged. Maya opened the file. Payments, layered through consulting invoices, storage adjustments, and auction referral fees. Daniel looked at the chart. Paperwork. Wearing a clean shirt. Hayes pointed to one line. Here. Every time a vehicle transferred below market value, Barlow received a recovery fee, Sharp got a broker fee, and a company tied to Voss received a consulting payment within 10 business days. Maya leaned closer. What about Mason? Cash withdrawals near the same dates. Not perfect, but repeated. Earl says Mason preferred envelopes. Daniel looked toward the hallway, where Mason sat in a room with his lawyer now, no longer speaking freely. Of course he did. An agent named Torres walked in with another folder. We found 6 active holds. Owners have not been notified that the federal review is underway. Maya took the folder. Any elderly owners? 1. 72-year-old woman from Mobile. Cadillac Escalade. She was traveling to visit her sister. Hold reason. Says suspected insurance irregularity. Maya's expression hardened, but her voice stayed calm. Contact through counsel or family liaison. No pressure. No surprise. Torres nodded. Already arranged. Daniel looked at the board again. 47 vehicles. 29 gone. 6 still trapped. 12 complaints buried. Each number looked clean on paper. But Daniel knew numbers were never just numbers. They were missed appointments, lost jobs, embarrassment at church, payments on cars people no longer had. He thought of the Corvette under the tarp. Harold Jennings, 68, retired, Army mechanic, a man who had likely kept receipts in a glove box, believed in maintenance schedules, and trusted that if he followed the rules would eventually protect him. Maya touched the Corvette photo. We should call Mr. Jennings today. Daniel nodded. Carefully. Hayes looked between them. I'll have victim services coordinate. No, Maya said softly. Let us do the first call. He deserves to hear it from someone who understands what was done. A few minutes later, they sat in a small office with the door closed. Maya dialed the number listed in the old complaint. It rang 4 times. A man answered. Jennings. Maya kept her tone warm and professional. Mr. Harold Jennings? Who's asking? My name is Maya Williams. I'm with the United States Department of Justice. I'm here with Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Daniel Williams, from the FBI. We're calling about your Corvette. Silence. Then the man's voice came back thinner. That car is gone. Daniel leaned closer. Sir, we located it. Another silence. Longer this time. You found my car? Yes, sir, Daniel said. It is in Brookhaven, Mississippi. Mr. Jennings breathed once, hard. They told me I lost the appeal. Said storage was more than the car was worth. Said I signed something. I never signed a thing. Maya closed her eyes briefly. We believe you. Those 3 words changed the room. Mr. Jennings did not cry, but his voice turned rough. My wife bought me that car when I retired. Said I spent 40 years fixing everybody else's ride and deserved one pretty thing for myself. Maya looked at Daniel. He looked down at the table. We're going to work to return it, Maya said. And we may need your statement, but only when you're ready. I'm ready now. Sir, there's no rush. There is for me, he said. I'm 70 years old next birthday. I waited long enough. After the call ended, Maya wrote Harold Jennings on a clean page in her notebook and underlined it once. Daniel said, That's the case. The money trail? No. The reason? By afternoon, the investigation moved faster. The bank records confirmed what Earl had described. Lenny Sharp's broker accounts touched 3 states. Councilman Voss's so-called consulting company had no real employees, no office, and no business beyond receiving money from deals connected to seized vehicles. Mason's financial records showed cash deposits just under reporting thresholds, always after major transfers. But the most damaging discovery came from a forgotten county archive. Torres entered the conference room holding a dusty storage box. You'll want this. Inside were closed complaint forms. Some typed, some handwritten. Many had the same final note. Unfounded. Claimant failed to provide sufficient proof. Maya picked up one complaint from a woman in Georgia who had lost her Lexus. Another from a small business owner whose pickup had been held until he missed 3 weeks of work. Another from a church deacon who wrote in careful cursive that he had never been treated so small in his life. Maya read that line twice. Daniel watched her. What? She asked. Nothing. No. Say it. Daniel looked at the stack. They didn't just take cars. They taught people that being right wasn't enough. Maya's face softened with sadness. That is the oldest kind of theft. Near sunset, Hayes gathered the team. We have probable cause for the next round. Search warrants for Voss's office, Sharp's business, and county contract records. Asset freezes requested. Brookhaven PD, command staff, will be notified through state authorities, not locally. Daniel nodded. Good. Hayes looked at him. You and Maya should step back for the evening. Maya gave him a look. Robert, you both were victims in the initiating event. I need you sharp tomorrow. Not running on anger and motel coffee. Daniel wanted to argue. Then he saw Maya flex her wrist under the table. Hayes was right. They left the station just as the sky turned orange. The rental sedan waited near the Veterans Memorial. Across the street, Betty's diner glowed with early supper light. Older couples sat in booths. A waitress refilled coffee. A man held the door for his wife and tipped his cap to her like courtesy still mattered. Maya paused. Do you ever wonder why places like this can be so kind in one room and so cruel in another? Daniel looked at the police station behind them. Because kindness without courage becomes decoration. She considered that. And courage? Courage is kindness that finally stands up. Maya slipped her notebook into her bag. The false report had opened the door. The camera had kept the truth alive. But the money trail gave the truth a road to follow. And now, for the first time, Brookhaven could not close the gate fast enough to stop it. The next morning, Brookhaven woke under a gray sky. Rain had not fallen yet, but it was coming. Daniel could smell it as he stepped out of the motel room with 2 coffees in a cardboard tray. The air was heavy, the kind of southern heaviness that made older folks pause at the door and say their knees knew the weather before the radio did. Maya stood beside the rental sedan, reading messages on her phone. Her wrist looked better, though Daniel knew she would not admit if it hurt. Hayes? He asked, handing her coffee. Victim Services has contact information for 9 former owners, she said. 3 are ready to speak today. 2 want letters first. 1 asked if this was another trick. Daniel looked toward the road. Can't blame him. No. They drove to the station in silence. Not an empty silence, a working one. The kind built by 2 people who had spent years walking into ugly rooms together and coming out with the facts. Inside the conference room, the investigation board had doubled in size. New lines connected vehicles to auction accounts, council approvals, and payment transfers. Leonard Sharp's name sat in the middle of the board like a spider. Councilman Voss's company appeared again and again. Mason's initials were written beside the traffic stops. Hayes stood at the board with Agent Torres. Sharp gave us access to his buyer list. Maya set her coffee down. Voluntarily? Hayes gave a dry look. With encouragement from his attorney, Daniel scanned the list. Where did the cars go? Some to small dealers in 3 states, Torres said. Some private buyers. 2 were shipped out of state, within 72 hours of transfer. Maya pointed to one entry. The Lexus from Georgia? Sold below market to a dealer in Baton Rouge. And the owner? Filed 3 complaints. All closed. Daniel read the complaint summary. The woman had written that she was a hospice nurse, that she needed the car for work, that every day without it cost her money and dignity. The final note from Brookhaven said, Claimant hostile. Insufficient documentation. Maya's face tightened. Hostile. That word does a lot of dirty work. Hayes nodded. So does insufficient. They began interviews in the afternoon. Not in interrogation rooms. Maya insisted on the community center annex. A quiet room with soft chairs, coffee, water, and tissues placed where people could take them without feeling watched. Daniel agreed. These people had already been handled by enough hard furniture. Harold Jennings arrived first. He was tall, thin, and neatly dressed in a tan jacket despite the humidity. His hair was white, his back straight. He shook Daniel's hand firmly and Maya's with both of his. Ma'am, he said. Agent Williams. Mr. Jennings, Daniel said. Thank you for coming. Harold sat slowly. I almost didn't. Maya leaned forward. What changed your mind? He looked at the table. My wife passed last year. Before she did, she kept telling me, Harold, don't let them make you ashamed of telling the truth. I figured I owed her that much. Daniel felt the sentence settle in the room. Harold told them what happened without drama. A stop outside Brookhaven. A question about ownership. A claim that the VIN looked altered. A tow. Then fees. Then delays. Then a letter saying the car had been transferred after abandonment. I never abandoned that Corvette, he said. I washed that car every Saturday whether it needed it or not. Maya's voice was soft. We believe you. Harold nodded once. but his jaw worked as if he had to hold himself together. I kept the key. He reached into his pocket and placed an old Corvette key on the table. The plastic was worn smooth. Daniel looked at it. A small thing. A whole life inside it. "May we photograph that for the file?" Maya asked. "Yes, ma'am," Harold said. "But I want it back." "You will get it back," Daniel said. The second interview was with Denise Carter, the hospice nurse from Georgia. She was 56, practical, tired, and angry in a way that had matured into precision. "I missed patients," she said. "Not because I wanted to, because I couldn't get to them. I rented cars until I couldn't afford to. Then I borrowed from my sister. Then I lost 2 accounts. All because some man with a badge decided my Lexus looked suspicious." Maya wrote carefully. "Did anyone explain your appeal rights?" Denise laughed once. "They mailed me forms after the deadline passed." Daniel asked, "Do you remember who signed the notice?" She slid a folder across the table. "I remember everything. Inside were copies, receipts, certified mail slips, and handwritten notes." Denise Carter had built her own evidence file because no one else had cared enough to build one for her. Maya looked at Daniel. "This is excellent documentation." Denise smiled sadly. "When you're not believed, you learn to keep paper." The third interview was shorter. A contractor from Texas joined by video. He had lost a pickup truck loaded with tools. The truck was eventually returned, but the tools were gone, and the fees nearly put him under. "My daddy taught me a man's tools are his promise," he said. They took more than a truck. By late afternoon, the rain finally came. It tapped against the community center windows while Daniel and Maya sat alone reviewing statements. Maya rubbed her wrist without thinking. Daniel noticed but did not mention it. "These are not just victims," she said. "They are witnesses to a pattern." Daniel nodded. "And the pattern proves intent." Maya looked at Harold's key, now sealed in an evidence photo packet. "That key may be the most honest thing in this case." Daniel smiled faintly. A key that outlived the lie. Hayes arrived with his coat damp from rain. "We got something from Sharp." Daniel looked up. "What?" He identified the county judge who signed off on expedited abandonment orders. Maya's eyes sharpened. "Name?" "Judge Raymond Keller." The room went still. Daniel stood and walked to the investigation board. Keller's name had appeared once in an old complaint, but not yet as a central figure. He took a marker and wrote it in red. Hayes said, "Sharp claims Keller knew the owners were still contesting." Maya closed Denise Carter's folder. "Then this is no longer just Mason, Barlow, Sharp, and Voss." Daniel capped the marker. "No, this is institutional." Rain slid down the windows in crooked lines. Outside, Brookhaven looked washed clean, but Daniel knew better. Rain could rinse pavement. It could not wash records. Maya stood beside him, looking at the board. Money remembered what people tried to forget. Daniel glanced at the names, the cars, the arrows, the payments, and the quiet faces now attached to them. "Yes," he said. "And people did too." That evening, Harold Jennings drove home without his Corvette, but with something he had not carried into the room. The knowledge that somebody had finally said his loss mattered. Denise Carter left with Maya's card in her purse. The contractor from Texas emailed tool receipts before supper. The case had moved beyond the Ferrari. It had found the people behind the paper. And once their voices entered the record, Brookhaven's silence no longer belonged to Mason Reed. By Wednesday, the case had names. Not just vehicle numbers, not just transfer dates, not just initials in Earl Barlow's ledger or deposits in accounts with clean little labels. Names: Harold Jennings, Denise Carter, Samuel Price, the contractor from Texas, Laura McBride from Louisiana, Reverend Thomas Bell from Memphis. People who had spent months, sometimes years, being treated like clerical errors. Daniel Williams stood before the conference room board, reading each name slowly. Maya sat at the table with her black notebook open. "We need to keep them centered." Hayes looked up from a file. "The prosecutors will." "I don't mean legally," Maya said. "I mean morally." Daniel turned. "She's right. If we let this become only financial fraud, Mason becomes a bad officer. Voss becomes a corrupt official, and the victims become numbers. That's how these people survived this long. Hayes nodded. Then we build both cases, money trail and civil rights pattern. Agent Torres entered with a printed list. Judge Raymond Keller signed 31 expedited abandonment orders connected to Barlow vehicles. In 22 of them, owners had active disputes. Maya's pen stopped. 22? Yes, ma'am. Daniel looked at the board. So Keller knew the cars weren't abandoned, or he deliberately avoided knowing, Hayes said. Either way, the result is the same. Maya closed one folder and opened another. Who benefits from not knowing? That is the question every corrupt system teaches itself not to ask. By late morning, the team had moved into the county records office. It was an old brick building beside the courthouse, with high ceilings, slow fans, and filing cabinets that smelled like dust and toner. A clerk in her 60s named Mrs. Elaine Porter met them at the counter. She wore a floral blouse, reading glasses on a chain, and the wary expression of someone who had seen too many officials smile before asking for the wrong thing. "You're here for the Barlow files," she said. Hayes showed his credentials. "Yes, ma'am." She looked at Daniel and Maya. "About time." Maya studied her. "You knew?" Mrs. Porter lowered her voice. "I knew enough to be afraid of knowing more," Daniel said. "Did you keep anything?" The clerk looked toward a hallway, then back at them. "Follow me." She led them into a small storage room where bankers' boxes lined the walls. On a bottom shelf sat 3 boxes marked road maintenance invoices. Mrs. Porter pulled one out. "These aren't road maintenance," she said. Inside were copies of disputed vehicle notices, certified mail receipts, owner appeals, and internal memos. Some were marked reviewed. Others were stamped closed before the response deadline had passed. Maya exhaled. "Why hide them?" Mrs. Porter's eyes grew moist, though her voice stayed firm. "Because I'm 64 years old, Miss Williams. I have worked in this building since my hair was black. I know what happens to papers that embarrass powerful men. They get misplaced. So I misplaced them first." Daniel looked at her with quiet respect. "You may have saved this case." She shook her head. "No, I should have spoken sooner." Maya's voice softened. "Sometimes, keeping the truth alive is the first brave thing a person can manage." Mrs. Porter looked down. "Then I managed that. Back at the station, the hidden files changed everything. They proved that victims had not abandoned their claims. They had written letters, called offices, sent proof, asked for hearings. Some had pleaded politely. Others had demanded answers. All had been ignored or delayed until the system could declare them finished. Daniel read one handwritten appeal from Reverend Thomas Bell. The pastor had lost his Cadillac while traveling through Brookhaven after visiting a sick friend. His letter was careful, dignified, and painful in its restraint. "I have served my congregation for 32 years. I have never asked for special treatment. I am asking only for the return of what is mine." Daniel placed the letter down carefully. Maya watched him. "That one hit you. My father wrote like that," Daniel said. Polite, even when the world owed him anger. Maya looked back at the board. Older generations were taught to survive by sounding calm, and men like Mason mistook calm for weakness. The next call came from Reverend Bell himself. He was 71, retired now, voice slow but steady. Maya put him on speaker after asking permission. "Reverend Bell," she said, "we recovered your appeal letter." A soft breath came through the phone. I wondered if anyone ever read it. Daniel leaned closer. "We read it, sir." "Then you know I wasn't trying to make trouble." Maya's eyes glistened. "Yes, sir. We know." The Reverend was quiet for a moment. "My wife told me to let the car go. Not because she didn't care, but because she could see what it was doing to me. Every phone call made me feel smaller. Every person at that office spoke as if I was asking for charity instead of justice." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Reverend Bell continued, "I spent my life telling people the truth would rise. But I admit, Agent Williams, I got tired of waiting on it." Daniel answered, "Truth does rise, Reverend. Sometimes it needs witnesses to lift it." "Well," the old man said, voice thick now, "you tell Mrs. Williams I still have my records. Maya smiled gently. I'm right here, sir. Then I'll send them today. When the call ended, the room remained quiet, not because there was nothing to say, but because everyone understood they had just heard the sound of a wound being named correctly. By evening, Judge Keller's connection became clearer. He had signed orders in batches, often the same day Voss's office sent recommendations. Sharp moved auction buyers within days. Barlow collected fees. Mason's stops fed the pipeline. Hayes stood at the board and drew a final line from Mason to Keller. There it is, he said. Maya looked at the network. A road stop became a courtroom order. That is how they made theft look official. Daniel nodded. And every signature gave the last lie respectability. Outside, Brookhaven's courthouse bell rang 6 times. People were leaving offices, locking doors, heading home for supper. Somewhere nearby, a church choir practiced an old hymn. The sound drifted faintly through the cracked window. Low and familiar, Daniel looked at the victim names one more time. Some people never stopped waiting for justice. Some kept keys in drawers, receipts in folders, letters in Bibles. Hope folded so small it almost disappeared. But it had not disappeared. Maya closed her notebook and stood. Tomorrow we bring Keller in. Hayes nodded. And Voss? Let him wait, Daniel said. Waiting teaches powerful men different lessons than it teaches victims. Maya looked at him. You sound almost poetic. No, Daniel said. Just tired of quiet cruelty. The room settled around them. The Ferrari had opened the door. The camera had kept the truth alive. The money had shown where the lie traveled. But the people, the real people, gave the case its soul. And now that their names were on the wall, no one in Brookhaven could bury them again. By Thursday morning, Brookhaven had run out of whispers. The story was no longer only in diners and church parking lots. It was in county offices, courthouse hallways, barbershops, and the waiting room of the police department, where Daniel and Maya Williams had first placed their badges on the counter. People spoke in careful voices at first, then with more certainty as the names began to surface. Mason Reed, Earl Barlow, Leonard Sharp, Councilman Voss, Judge Raymond Keller. The quiet machine had finally become visible. Judge Keller arrived at the station just after 9, not in custody but under escort. He wore a dark suit and a face trained by decades of pretending patience was wisdom. His silver hair was neatly combed. His shoes shone. He looked like a man who had spent his career sitting above others and had forgotten how ordinary floors felt. Maya watched him enter the conference room. Judge Keller, she said. He looked at her badge, then at Daniel's. I understand there has been some confusion. Daniel closed the door behind him. That word is getting popular in Brookhaven. Keller sat without being invited. I signed documents presented to my office in good faith. Maya placed a folder in front of him. 22 owners had active disputes when you signed expedited abandonment orders. I rely on county certification. Daniel sat across from him. Mrs. Elaine Porter kept copies of the appeals your office claimed were not on file. For the first time, Keller's eyes shifted. Maya opened the folder. Harold Jennings, Denise Carter, Reverend Thomas Bell, Laura McBride, Samuel Price. These people were still asking for hearings when their vehicles were moved toward auction. Keller's jaw tightened. Administrative errors happen. Repeated errors that always benefit the same people are not errors, Maya said. Daniel placed another page on the table. Payments to Voss's consulting company. Transfer approvals. Auction dates. Your signatures. Keller looked at the page but did not touch it. You cannot prove intent. Maya leaned forward. Her voice remained calm, but every word carried weight. Judge Keller, you are not here because one form was wrong. You are here because an entire process was shaped to exhaust lawful owners until theft could look like abandonment. Keller said nothing. Daniel studied him. Men like Mason enjoyed open power. Men like Keller preferred clean hands. But clean hands could sign dirty orders. Hayes entered with Agent Torres and stood near the wall. Judge Keller, Leonard Sharp has provided statements regarding your office's role. Keller's composure cracked just enough to show fear beneath it. Sharp is a criminal trying to save himself. So is Earl Barlow, Hayes said. So is Councilman Voss. Strange thing, Judge. Criminals sometimes keep excellent records. Maya slid Mrs. Porter's hidden files across the table. And clerks sometimes keep better ones. Keller looked at the documents, and the room changed. No one raised a voice. No one needed to. The evidence had become louder than any accusation. An hour later, Keller's attorney was on the phone. 2 hours later, Councilman Voss requested a proffer session. By early afternoon, Mason Reed was brought back into the main conference room. This time, he wore no smug expression. His lawyer sat beside him, stiff and unhappy. Mason's uniform looked the same, but it no longer seemed to belong to him. On the table lay the original yellow impound slip Daniel had been handed on the road. Beside it were the false system entry, the Ferrari camera stills, the tow yard ledger, victim complaints, bank records, and the hidden appeal files. Maya placed her black notebook at the end of the table. Daniel stood. "This started here for us," he said. "But it did not start with us." Mason looked at the documents, then away. Daniel picked up the impound slip. "You thought this was about a Ferrari." No one spoke. He placed the slip back down. "It was never about the car. It was about everyone you did this to before us." Mason's lawyer whispered something, but Mason barely seemed to hear it. Maya opened one file. Harold Jennings kept a key for a car he was told he had abandoned. Denise Carter lost work because you turned her Lexus into a bargaining chip. Reverend Bell wrote a letter so respectful it should shame every person who ignored it. Mason's face tightened. "I didn't handle every case." "No," Maya said. "You only fed the system that did." Hayes stepped forward. "Officer Reed, based on the evidence collected, you are being placed under arrest on federal charges, including conspiracy, deprivation of rights, under color of law, obstruction, evidence tampering, and related fraud offenses." The room became very still. Mason's lawyer closed his eyes for half a second. Mason stood slowly. "You're arresting me here?" Daniel looked around the conference room, the same building where Mason had told them to come back, the same department that had held their car, the same air where he had mistaken cruelty for authority. "Yes," Daniel said. "Here." An agent stepped behind Mason and secured his wrists. No one shoved him. No one humiliated him. No one needed to become him in order to defeat him. Mason looked at Maya. "You got what you wanted." Maya held his gaze. "No. The people on that wall are getting what they were owed." He turned toward Daniel. "You think this makes things right?" Daniel's answer came quietly. "No. Justice does not erase harm. It only refuses to let harm have the final word." For the first time, Mason had nothing to say. As agents led him through the hallway, the dispatcher watched from behind the desk. Carl Benton stood near the records room, eyes wet but steady. Mrs. Porter had come to deliver another box of files and stood with both hands clasped around her purse. Outside the front window, a few townspeople had gathered at a distance, not cheering, not shouting, simply witnessing. Mason passed the lobby where Daniel and Maya had waited 2 days before. This time, no one asked them to sit. At the front doors, Mason paused when he saw the black federal vehicle waiting. Daniel walked beside him, not close enough to threaten, close enough to be heard. "Yesterday you believed paperwork could hide the truth," Daniel said. "Today the truth is carrying the paperwork." Mason looked down. The agents placed him in the vehicle. Back inside, Maya returned to the conference table. She looked at the documents, the names, the photos, the ordinary paper that had held extraordinary cruelty. Then she closed the folder on Mason Reed. Hayes exhaled. "First arrest down." Daniel looked at the investigation board. Voss, Sharp, Barlow, Keller. More signatures, more accounts, more hearings to come. "Not first," Maya said softly. Hayes looked at her. She touched Harold Jennings's name on the wall. "First one, they'll see." Daniel stood beside her. The station stayed silent. Justice did not need applause. 2 weeks later, the Ferrari came home. Not home in the way a car returns to a garage, washed and forgotten beneath a cover. Home in the way something wrongly taken is placed back into the hands of the person it belonged to, with witnesses present and signatures finally meaning what signatures were supposed to mean. Bay 3 was open that morning. Sunlight poured across the concrete floor where oil stains and tire marks still showed beneath fresh evidence tape. Barlow County Recovery was no longer operating. Its sign hung crooked by the gate, and federal notices were posted on the office door. Daniel Williams stood beside the red Ferrari with Maya at his side. Robert Hayes handed him the keys. "Vehicle released back to lawful owners," Hayes said. Daniel took the keys, then looked at Maya. "You want to drive?" Maya smiled faintly. "After all this, you think I'm letting you have the first turn?" For the first time in days, Daniel laughed. The sound was small but real. Across the yard, Harold Jennings stood beside his black Corvette. Its tires had been filled, the dust cleared from the windshield, and his old key rested in his palm. He did not start the engine right away. He only stood there with one hand on the roof, his head bowed as if greeting an old friend. Maya walked over to him. "Mr. Jennings?" He looked up. His eyes were wet, but his back was straight. "My wife would have liked to see this. I think she knew you'd make it back to this moment," Maya said. Harold nodded. Maybe she did. Denise Carter's Lexus was not in the yard anymore. It had been traced to Louisiana and frozen in place pending return. Reverend Bell's Cadillac had been located at a dealer 2 counties away. Other vehicles were still being found. Some were gone for good. But the records were no longer buried. For many people, that was the first kind of restoration. The truth spoken aloud. At the police department, Mason Reed remained in federal custody. Councilman Voss had resigned. Leonard Sharp was cooperating. Judge Keller's chambers had been searched, and the county had announced an outside review of every vehicle seizure for the past decade. Brookhaven did not heal overnight. Towns rarely did. But denial had lost its chair at the table. Mrs. Porter arrived carrying a pie wrapped in foil. Hayes looked at it with surprise. "Ma'am, you know this is still an active federal site." She handed it to him anyway. "It's pecan. Active federal agents still eat, don't they?" Maya smiled. "Yes, ma'am. They do." Mrs. Porter turned to Daniel. "You folks leaving today?" "After we finish a few signatures." She nodded toward the Ferrari. "That car sure caused a storm." Daniel looked at the red hood shining in the sun. "No, ma'am. It just gave the storm somewhere to start." Mrs. Porter thought about that, then smiled sadly. Well, maybe Brookhaven needed rain. Later that afternoon, Daniel and Maya drove out of the tow yard in the Ferrari. This time, no patrol cruiser followed. No false report waited in a computer. No man with a badge stood beside the road deciding whether their dignity looked suspicious. Main Street passed slowly. Betty's Diner, the feed store, the Methodist Church, the Veterans Memorial. People looked up as the Ferrari rolled through town. Some stared. Some lowered their eyes. A few nodded. At a red light, an older black man on the sidewalk raised 2 fingers in a quiet salute. Daniel returned it. Maya noticed. "You know him?" "No, but he knows enough." Daniel looked ahead as the light turned green. Sometimes, enough is enough. They drove in silence for a while, past the last gas station and back toward Route 51. The same road, the same pine trees, the same heavy Mississippi heat. Yet it felt different now. Not safe exactly. Safety was too simple a word. But witnessed, named, changed in the way a place changes after the truth has walked through it and left footprints. Maya rested one hand near the window. Her wrist had mostly healed. "What made you suspicious first?" Daniel kept both hands on the wheel. "Mason?" "Yes." He looked at ownership before evidence. Maya nodded slowly. "That's when you knew." "That's when I wondered. I knew when the tow driver called him by first name." She looked at him. "And when he touched the camera?" Daniel's mouth tightened. "That's when he convicted himself in my mind." The highway opened in front of them. Maya looked back once. Brookhaven was already shrinking behind them. "Do you think this will last?" "The arrests? The lesson?" Daniel considered the question. "For some people, yes. For others, only until they think no one is watching again." "That sounds cynical." "It's experienced." Maya smiled gently. "There's the difference." Daniel glanced at her. "You sound like a prosecutor." "I am a prosecutor, and a very dangerous passenger. Only when someone steals my car." He laughed again. "And this time, It came easier. Miles later, Daniel's phone rang through the car speakers. "Hayes," Daniel answered. "Williams." Hayes's voice filled the cabin. "Thought you'd want to know. Reverend Bell's Cadillac is being returned tomorrow. Denise Carter's Lexus should be released next week. Jennings drove his Corvette out himself." Maya smiled. "How did he look?" "Like a man 20 years younger," Hayes said. "Then he told me the engine needed proper tuning because nobody in that yard knew how to respect a machine." Daniel shook his head. "Good for him," Hayes continued. "Also, Carl Benton gave a full statement. He's retiring, but he wants to testify." Maya looked out at the road. "Silence has a cost. Maybe testimony pays some of it back." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "That's good. Use it," Maya said. "I might." The call ended. The Ferrari moved smoothly beneath them, its engine low and steady. Daniel thought about the first day, about Mason's voice on the roadside, about Maya's trembling hand, about the yellow impound slip folded in his wallet. He still had it. He would keep it, not as a wound, but as a reminder. Justice did not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it came in a file box hidden by an old clerk. Sometimes in a camera no one noticed. Sometimes in a key an old man refused to throw away. Sometimes in the steady voice of someone who had every reason to rage but chose to build a case instead. Maya watched the trees blur past. "Do you feel better?" Daniel took a long breath. "Not better." "No?" "Clearer." She understood. The car crossed the county line. Behind them, Brookhaven remained where it had always been, but it was no longer exactly what it had been. Names once buried were now written. Cars once vanished were being found. Men who called theft procedure were learning the weight of real paperwork. Ahead, the afternoon sun broke through a bank of clouds and spread across the road in gold. Daniel pressed the accelerator gently. The Ferrari moved into the light, and for the first time since Mason Reed had said that supercars were only for people with money, no one on that road had the power to decide what Daniel and Maya Williams were allowed to deserve. The lesson of this story is that prejudice may look powerful for a moment, but truth has a way of outlasting every lie. Mason Reed believed his badge gave him the right to judge people by their race, their car, and his own suspicion. But Daniel and Maya proved that real strength is not loud, cruel, or reckless. It is calm, patient, and committed to justice. The story reminds us that corruption survives when good people stay silent, but it begins to fall the moment someone keeps the evidence, speaks the truth, and refuses to let dignity be stolen. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If it touched your heart, I would truly love to hear your thoughts on the storytelling, the emotional pacing, or whatever stayed with you after listening. Every comment you share helps make the next stories more honest, moving, and meaningful. And if you have a powerful or meaningful story of your own, please do not hesitate to send it to the channel. It may become the next story to touch and inspire thousands of others. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.